The actual beginning, though it's not really the beginning, but the actual flashpoint was, I remember very clearly. I can still see the corner in my house in 20 Northmore Road where it happened. I got an enormous pile of exam papers there, and marking school examinations in the summertime is an enormous, very laborious, and unfortunately also boring. And I remember picking up a paper and actually I nearly gave an extra mark for it, extra 5 marks, actually. There was one page on this particular paper was left blank. Glorious. Nothing to read. So I scribbled on it, I can't think why. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. I think that was eventually published in 1937. I now wanted to try my hand at writing a really stupendously long narrative and to see whether I had sufficient art, cunning, or material to make a really long narrative which would hold the average reader right through. No. I wouldn't mind other people knowing it and enjoying it, but I didn't really want to make, like some people who've been equally inventive in language have done, sort of make cults and have people all speaking it together. No, I don't desire to go and have afternoons talking Elvish to chaps. One thing, of course, Elvish is too complicated. I've never finished making it. People do not fully understand the difference between an allegory and an application. You can go to a Shakespeare play and you can apply it to things in your mind if you like, but they're not allegories. At least most of them are not. There's more allegorical elements, for instance, in the Tempest than the most, but certainly, I mean, many people apply to nuclear, the ring, to particularly the nuclear bomb, don't they? I think that was in my mind, the whole thing is only an allegory of it. Well, it isn't. One reviewer once said, this is a jolly book, isn't it? All the right boys come home and they're happy and glad. It isn't true, of course. You can't have read the story. If you really come down to any large story, it interests people, can hold them attention for a considerable time, or make stories, practically always, a human story is practically always about one thing, aren't they? Death. The inevitability of death. I don't know, would you agree with that? But anyway, that is what, there was a quotation from Simon Beauvoir that I read in the paper the other day, which seems to me put it in a nutshell. I think I'll read it. There is no such thing as a natural death. Nothing that happens to man is ever natural, since his presence calls the whole world into question. All men must die, but for every man his death is an accident, and even if he knows it and consents to it, an unjustifiable violation. Well, you may agree with words or not, but those are the key spring of the laws of the ring. Vast number, as I can judge from my very considerable fan mail, I should say that only a small proportion I possess, and even of those, not very many have really read the books with any attention. Well, it is meant to be escapist, because I use escapism in its proper sense. It was a man getting out of prison. I first began seriously to invent languages about when I was 13 or 14. I've never stopped, really. Languages have a flavour to me, which I never understand people saying, for instance, it was awfully dry and dull, because a new language to me is just like taking a new wine or a new sweetmeat or something. What I'm doing now is to try and write in Elvish. My writing is very inferior to the Elv. Their standard greeting when meeting: a star shines upon our meeting. Oh, Lord. I made a mistake, didn't I? And that stands for Ellen, Sila, Lumen, Aumenti Elvo. It's a rather beautiful language, I think. Food? Never been a trencherman. I admire trenchermen, therefore I make... But I like, I must say, since England produces the best basic food in Europe, on the whole, it does. Yes, yes, I drink things. I like, of course, feeling elevated, but I'm very fond of beer. I've always smoked. I sometimes smoke beyond the point when you enjoy it, which is silly, but I do smoke and enjoy it. And as a matter of fact, it's now so tied to writing that I can't write without it. I invented that in a bath, I remember. Yes, I remember inventing that in one of the baths in 29 when I was having a bath in 20 North Moreau. I still remember kicking the sponge out of the bath when I got the last I think that will do, all right, and jumped out. Ashnazga dura batuluk, Ashnazga gimbatul, Ashnazga thrakatuluk, Achburzumishekrim. I don't live in America. Surely they should tell me. I should like to ask them some questions of how such things arise. I observe in general that North America has always been much more easily kindled than England, or indeed any country in Europe. And for instance, the Dickens cult and the extraordinary excitement about Dickens. So the only people who came down to the quay to watch the mail ship come in, the only thing they wanted to know is what happened to the next chapter. They weren't worried about goods. Hobbits. Oh, well, you meet them, you know. There's hobbits by nature and hobbits by stature, and there's hobbits who happen to be both, yeah. There must be places fairly remote from here. Like a little place on the extreme Yorkshire East Coast called Roos, RWS. Various places of that kind, but of course, since I'm always very conscious of my position, as I say, I can remember a position which where the window was when I'm writing. A lot of places I've lived in, of course, are connected with the very family in my mind with the story, the emotions at the time. Of course, I lived first in a little house which again, fate follows me again, is the first house I ever had. It's now just been destroyed. I was in what is now called Pusey Street. Then when I came back to Oxford, I lived in two houses in North Moreau. They're both associated with my writing, in particular the second one, number 20, which now belongs to Trinity College, and originally was built by Basil Blackmore. And then when the war was over, and most of what property I had been destroyed, I had to move back to the little house in Manor Road, which is now opposite the English Library. That's where the Lord of the Rings was, amongst others, was actually finished, or finalized, as they would say. A lot of the writing and revision took place at an interesting place, a house, I think, which belonged to the Lytton family. I think it belonged to Bulwer Lytton, actually, which then became, since then, become a school, the oratory school, which moved from Edgbaston in Birmingham, and then moved there in the wartime. As a headmaster friend of mine, I stayed a whole large part of one long vacation there. I was given one of the master's rooms where I had perfect peace and quiet, and I, banging away on a typewriter, I did most of the revision of the Lord of the Rings. Manor Road, of course, everything is destroyed. I mean, Manor Road, which I lived at, is now being completely destroyed. There's an enormous combined English and law library built there, which isn't bad, I think, at all. It's a great. So a lot of it inside is very good, anyway. In there, amongst other things, which is connected, I suppose, with me, reposes a bronze bust to myself, which has an interesting history. It was done by my daughter-in-law. Faith Falconbridge Tolkien, and it was exhibited in the British Academy. There I was staring down the road. It was eventually presented to me by the English faculty, but it was only a plaster cast, and so I used some of the ill-gotten gains of Lord of the Rings to have it cast in bronze. There's about only one firm that does it, and presented it at the end of my career too. It was rather a fine bust. You ought to have a snap of it. I haven't the slightest recollection whatsoever. I normally preserve a very bright visual recollection of where I was, where I am, and things that are associated with what I'm looking at. I haven't the slightest recollection of anything, either the position, where the window was, myself, or the thoughts, anything out of the whole of the end chapter. That came straight out of the leaf mode. There was no difficulty, there was no sense of trouble of composition. It must have been sort of burgeoning there. Everybody, including the divine spirits under God, makes mistakes in this mythology, and of course the gods made a primary error. Instead of leaving the elves and men to find out their way under the guidance of God, they invited the elves because the rebel amongst them, the wicked god Melkor, was alive, was a devastated large part of the world. They took them back into their paradise to the west to protect them. And so that the whole machinery starts from the rebellion of the elves and their fall in rebellion of the evil they did in the bursting out from paradise. So what you've got in our period is two lots of elves, ones that never started, just didn't want to be bothered to be anything higher than they were the ordinary woodland elves of the far east. Those who started to go to the divine paradise and never got there, which are the grey elves of the west, and those who got and came back as exiled. The high elves who sing this the song to Elbereth in the beginning of the Lord of the Rings are exiled elves who'd once known what it was to see the demiurgic gods in person. Now dwarves are differently, don't they, in this particular thing. They have certain grievances against men and against elves. They are incarnate in bodies, rather like ourselves. We don't know much about them, but they apparently are mortal, though they are longeval. Where do they come into the scheme? Well, of course, a great deal of thought to provide their origin. I don't think I was saying anything about it at the moment, but they have a rational origin related to that theme, but they're not part of the children of God.
Lovely.
That's all I can really say about this. Men are just men. I raised my children, then with the two elder ones, who took kindly and on the whole favourable interest in it. But they criticised very severely, and first opened my eyes to the whole situation which led to my essay on fairy story, criticised very severely all those things in which, owing to bad models, I thought was suitable to put into children's story. They hated asides, anything like, so now I've told you enough. They loathed anything that made it sound as if you were talking to an actual audience. There are in existence a very large now collected and practically written, but legends about the world of the past, particularly after the exiled elves came back and conducted their war against the devil in the northwestern part of this world we live in, and the connection of the men who joined in with them. You're obliged, any author I imagine is obliged to call on his stock, private stock.
Is this another word for what Freud would call the unconscious?
No.
No, I didn't think it was.
No, both. What is himself, both, no doubt, what he inherits, his unconscious, and what he has as part of his mental make-up and reading, his memory. But he may not have the object of revealing that, or lecturing to anybody, or even trying to put forward his view as a total one or a good one.
Let's avoid the word lecture for a moment, because it suggests a propagandist work, and I don't think anybody is really talking about that.
Well, they have been, so perhaps...
Well, I'm not, and
good,
you're not, so
good,
let's
good.
not.
No, good, good.
But let's then accept the fact that out of this stock you invent the world, and this stock does include a stock of ideas about how worlds ought to be. No?
No. Because I don't believe that there is any one recipe at any one time.
You don't yourself make out a recipe for personal behaviour. You don't believe you yourself ought to live in a certain sort of way.
Ah, well, but I thought you were talking about worlds, when I thought you were thought to fact, for instance, that a lot of kings and obviously the hereditary principle is a strong fact, and so on, but...
well, let's be plain.
Yeah.
For instance, in this particular
Yes.
world that you have invented, the hereditary principle is very strong,
Yes, yes, yes.
though not ubiquitous. The hobbits don't have one, don't
No,
they?
quite so, no.
But do you yourself look back on a world in which the hereditary principle is strong with affection?
I do, yes, yes, obviously. But Shawshank is also very much easier one, very much, well, I find it very much easier to one in which, out of which to make a story.
And you're only concerned with making a story?
Which was my primary concern, which I started out with.
And you took 14 years to make the story.
Quite so, yes.
And this was a story in...
But that is partly out of the fact that I'm a meticulous sort of bloke. And that I took 14 years, not for the general things it is now, but refining time schemes and getting everything right and so on.
Well, for instance, this
Yes.
whole matter of the appendices, 100 pages, language, social customs, history. Normally, if you had been writing a history as a historian, all these would have existed on a card index before you ever began to write.
Yeah.
Is this true for the
Very
Lord
much
of the
so,
Rings?
yes. One thing that, for instance, in the remarks you made at the beginning was the fact that time passed and the hobbits grew into this world.
Yes.
Matter of fact, what really happened was that because having already constructed the world, they became drawn into it.
The world was constructed like a model aeroplane.
No,
before-
no, but it existed in posse and in a large scale
Yes.
plan before The Hobbit was written. The Hobbit was in fact originally an attempt to write something outside it and grew into it.
So that you had literally invented the world before you even wrote The Hobbit.
Oh yes, indeed.
Why?
Why, I don't think so. I could not really think why one wishes to create a thing like that.
Well then, all right, how? What started it? There must have been a point at which quite suddenly, like God, you chose to make the world like that.
I was going to use that illustration. That's one of his lessons. Because, as I've said elsewhere, I think that if you wish to push me back into what semi-theological or philosophical back, I think because being made by a creator, one of our natural faculties is wishing to create. But since we aren't creators, we have to sub-create. That's to say, we have to rearrange the primary material in some particular form which pleases us, which may, it isn't necessarily a moral pleasing, it's partly an aesthetic pleasing.
Then you make this distinction between what pleases aesthetically because it's balanced and what pleases morally. God, we may assume, made a moral rather than an aesthetic choice.
That
Is this too great an assumption?
it's one that would require a very long time to debate, but I should have thought that we are dealing with something which we're only looking at facets of one whole, but certainly an aesthetic whole is surely, an aesthetic facet is as strongly to be predicated as a moral one.
In this world that you yourself have made, the complexities that exist mostly, it seems to me, outside the creatures of the world. There is an absolute evil and there is an idea of absolute good. Would you agree? Mordor, after all, is a principle of absolute
I
evil.
don't believe in absolute evil, but I do believe in absolute good.
Yes.
Let's say,
If you don't believe in absolute evil, why did you create the Dark Lord, who seems to be the apotheosis of it?
as he said in the book, that he himself was not evil to begin with.
Ah, he fell. Then, like Lucifer.
Yeah.
So you're...
Well, he's several stages down from Lucifer.
You do believe, then, that there can be a state of absolute good from which most people do fall.
He said, for instance, there's no religion in the book. There isn't, for reasons which are partly aesthetic, partly auctorial, and partly the history. This book, so-called Lord of the Rings, comes at the end of a long series of stories I've created in which the situation would be explained. Why there were no, for instance, churches, rituals, and temples, and so on.
Yes, but sure, to read into the book a kind of allegory of the H-bomb. What is said somewhere in the book is that the One Ring is a power so enormous that even if a good man were to use it against a bad, it would corrupt the good man.
But that is the thing which other people have arrived, other views, other people arrived at long before H-bomb was invented. Also, I may say that I began building the stories in which the Dark Lord when I was an undergraduate. They were already in an advanced stage during the First War. The H-bomb hadn't been heard of.
If you were to be remembered as the man who has made the Lord of the Rings, would you rather be remembered as a man who has said something or as a man who has made something?
I don't think you can distinguish. The made thing, unless it says something, won't be remembered.
Thank you.
It's finally the old basic thing which must have occurred often in literature, the reluctant hero. And the story, in essence, is the adventures of this little chap. Then, of course, you move out into the wilder world where the imagination can be let go. This was all blocked. Of two very English and extremely British parents. I think it was a kind of double coming home, which made the effect of the ordinary English meadows, countryside, and breaks so immensely important to me. I was, on the whole, a rather puny, over-mothered, timid little creature who was not much of a success. I eventually became a fairly ordinary scholar. Turned out to be good at rugby football, of all odd things. Let me say at once that owing to the casualties in the war and various other things, there are very few people to elect. Too big a job for me, really. Which means to say that I was legally removed. It's a pity it couldn't be in the springtime when that tree wouldn't look sad, but covered with leaves, you see. Look old but not sad. And these, that looks like kind of plain, doesn't it? Something. Whatever that tree is, and these are limes. But all the limes have such a, however old they are, they're lovely green in spring. I have always, for some reason, I don't know why, been enormously attracted by trees. All my work is full of trees. I suppose I have actually, in some simple-minded form of longing, actually would like to. I should have liked to be able to make contact with the tree and find out what it feels about things. And the old Lent says a few things, doesn't it, about feeling the sap run up and the open to the sun. Trees, and a lot of trees have gone, big trees from there, you see. It was much more woody, and there was a long line of trees, this kind only younger, all along the wall, so those houses couldn't see you and you couldn't see them when they were in leaf. Yes. It was a much more secluded garden.
They chained the scholars instead of the books. I said, "You'll pardon me, madam, been very foolish of them." She said, "Why?" I said, "Our scholars come and go. Our books must remain with us." She said, "Thank you very much." I said, "It is my pleasure." There was
that's the dreadful. Mr. Kent were all togged up. I've never seen them so tidy.
It seems to me that there is an air of what I would call donnish pastime about all Tolkien's works.
Can't get out. There's a great damn thing in the way. I'll try and climb up. 1 minute. Well, hello, chap. What are you doing down there?
Oh, that's the entrance to the office at the bottom. Above it, you have the Queen's room, where Queen Henrietta. So it's actually the office, of course, is to do with the Estates Office, you know, where they deal with all the estates belonging to the college.
I see.
And here's the bursar just coming across.
He's very helpful.
And there, through the door, their sharp right, of course, is the State's Office. Quite a modern little fellow.
It's a pity the book didn't catch on a bit sooner, isn't it?
Hey!
And all the lands that you see, and those that lie round about them, shall be dwellings of men. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule. The third age was my age. I was the enemy of Sauron, and my work is finished. The burden must lie now upon you and your kindred. And the power of the three rings also is ended.